Hey everyone, welcome to what may be a new series. I'll decide if I'm going to put up the rest of the episodes in this, but it may be a new series for the nation of late age Ctis. So, this is an Egyptian themed lizard faction. In the early and middle age, this is a faction that exists in the swamps. They all have swamp survival. In the middle age, they get like a disease flavored dominion as one gets in swamps. In the late age, though, they have moved to the wasteland. It is now, Egypt no longer with like the flooded Nile. It is the desertified, barren lands of Ctis. So I'm actually going to, with Dominion 6 coming out, I'm actually going to share with you a national overview for Dominion 6 for late age Ctis, which is dramatically changed and reworked. But I have just finished playing a game in Dominions 5. And as one does when one plays a game in Dominions 5 with like cool, innovative strategies, which we're going to do here, kind of the secret sauce gets out. And so I just want to share with you what the secret sauce is so that you can use it in your games. And then also, I may want to put up, it was a pretty fun game. So I'll probably put up some of it will probably be like an abbreviated playthrough because I think a lot of these things will be applicable in Dominion 6. So without further ado, we'll take a look. We're going to look first, and I'll try to put timestamps in the video. We'll look first at Dominions 5, the nation, and then we'll look at the changes going into Dominion 6. And then I'll probably have a separate video for Pretender Design, because this is going to take a little bit of a while. So late age Ctis, instead of having nature, water, and death, as they primarily have in middle age, now it's like death and fire, with a little bit of and they also had a lot of astral. Now they have much more limited access to astral. Like in middle age and early age, they used to have shamans, which have nature and astral paths. But now it's like basically death and fire with this guy, the Empoisoner, who gets death and nature. And the astral they have is very limited. It's limited to Sarumancers, who get it as a 1 in 4 random. And these guys are slow to recruit, but they are any fort. The other thing that's important is like the other eras of Ctis. You can get Sarumancers in any fort. And Sarumancers are kind of pretty intense mages. They're 5-path mages. They're always death 3. That means, they can skelly spam really cheap. They also have the fire cross path. And so one of the things this nation is known for is it's known for Banefire spam. And this is a spell, it's death 3, fire 1. So literally all of them can cast it. And yeah, it's 55 armor piercing damage. So that means if you have the max possible protection, which nobody has 40, that gets treated as 20, you're still going to have 25 damage coming through, even with max protection. So it's effectively, it's a lot. You can think of it as at least 25 armor negating damage, but usually a lot more. Furthermore, it's area of effect 1, so it's going to delete the whole tile. And then not only will it delete the whole tile, but in a big area around it, it's going to decay stuff. So you get like 10 of these guys spamming Banefire, you're causing a lot of damage. Even if you lose the battle, the decay is going to usually kill off a bunch of stuff. And it's reasonably low tech. It's only a 6. That's one of the kind of like the things Ctis is known for. That doesn't mean that's necessarily the way you should play it. And we're not going to do a ton of Banefire spam in the game that I may or may not put up here. But it's certainly one of the things they can do. The other thing is Death 3 is like a critical access point for invulnerability and Soul Vortex. And this is what lets you do like very budget thug raiding. And these guys can actually be pretty versatile raiders. They have obviously some pretty big hit point problems. But you could potentially take like a larger bless or something and that will fix a lot of that, it'll help with a lot of that. Like even just having 3 or 4 more hit points will help. But yeah, these guys, the other thing is these are the cross paths, not only for Banefire, but also for Phoenix Pyre Soul Vortex thugs. And usually you also want to have a Flesh Eater that you stick on them. But yeah, you do Soul Vortex and Vulnerability, Phoenix Pyre, and then when you die, you respawn somewhere. And as long as you have enough protection that it takes like 1 round for people to kill you, usually Soul Vortex, if you're surrounded by enemy infantry, usually Soul Vortex will give you enough fatigue back that you won't die permanently from the Phoenix Pyre proc. Because the way Phoenix Pyre works is basically every time you die, you blow up all the stuff around you, but as long as you're not fatigued out, as long as you're under 100 fatigue, you'll respawn. So that's why those two combo well together. So Yeah, these guys are actually reasonably versatile. These are really good cross paths. And the things that I was saying you can do with them, like you also have earth and astral. So these are also, can jump in communions. This is not, the communion thing is not something like late age is an era of astral powers. You're going to be vulnerable to magic duel. You're not going to have cheap or easy communion slaves unless you like find indies. Like, it's not really the main thing, but with gear, they can magic face. Now you've got a magic face threat. The earth ones are probably your best thugs. Your death ones are probably your best battle casters. And your fire ones give you access to like medium fire magic, because you can also forge very cheap fire boosters, the fire death booster. And so you can, with Phoenix power and the fire random, you can get up to fire 4 with that cheap booster. So you get pretty ubiquitous high level fire magic via the fire randoms, and then the cheap construction 6 booster. So that's kind of how it's a way to think about the cross paths for this. It also gives you access to Shade Mail with Death Earth. But yeah, so anything that these guys can do, you can also do sort of better with a white mage. So you twice born these guys, they die, they come back as a white mage. And that white mage is no longer going to have cold-blooded, which of course is the bane of Ctis. And this is one of the things that's going to be different in Dominion 6. Cold-blooded has been reworked. You now mitigate a lot of the cold-blooded malice. If you take cold resistance, or if you get cold resistance on your guys anyhow, you can buff it, right? As a fire mage, they can just cast protection from cold. There goes the cold-blooded malice, right? Anyhow, that's the thing that's going to be getting reworked. So that's another reason Ctis will be better in all the ages in Dominion 6. But in Dominions 5, you can get rid of the cold-blooded malice by turning into a white mage, and you're going to get way more hit points. So if you can do like very hard thugging, and you can use like the astral guys as fluffers. There's just a bunch of things you can do. And like Earth 1, Fire 1, Death 3, those are like super combatant paths. Like, you do Temper Flesh, Soul Vortex, Phoenix Pyre, Iron Skin. You're ready to go. Fire Shield maybe. So you can definitely potentially army white people. Now, of course, like if it's a Soul Slay army, you better have a ton of MR gear. I mean, it's going to depend. But you have the potential within the white mage forms of these guys to like army white people. They're so strong. So anyway, these guys are amazing, and you can make them every fort. The only problem is they're slow to recruit. But you have citadels, so you get 3/4 of one every turn if you have upgraded to a citadel. So anyway, Sarumancers, they're the main reason, not the main. They're one of the 2 main reasons why you want to play late age Ctis. Are they super efficient? I mean, I don't know. This is a question for the armchair philosophers of Dominions. Do they work really well in games? Yeah, a lot of times. They're expensive, they're slow to recruit, but they're really good. So yeah, let's keep looking at the rest. We get the Empoisoner. These guys are top-end assassins. If you're getting a lot of, I think you need to make a fair number. Like, you need to have a stable of at least 20 of these guys, and you want to get them reasonably early. You may choose to get the other guys like these Keeper of the Tombs. There's better research bang for your buck. They get the same amount of research as the Empoisoner, but they cost basically the same, and they're way less upkeep. And they're going to give you way more research than a Sarumancer normally, especially if you take magic scales. If you take drain scales, it might be better to make Sarumancers for research. But if you take magic scales, these guys are going to be significantly faster researchers. So in-game, I make a fair number of these, then I switch over to Empoisoners. I think I make a couple Empoisoners in case I get into a first war. I want to at least have the option to assassinate some people. But then I switch over to these to get research going. This is in my capital, because I haven't really mentioned that. I've kind of glossed over it. But everything this way, you can get everywhere. It's your little crappy mages, these Empoisoners, and these Keepers of the Tomb that are cap only. So that's kind of interesting, because normally, it's the good mages that are cap only, and the crappy ones you can get everywhere. Well, that's reversed, right? So you can get the good mages everywhere. The crappy ones you can only get in your capital. But the crappy ones are valuable. These guys are your most efficient researcher in magic scales, and Empoisoners are really good assassins. So if people are going to run at you early, you want to have a stable, like basically the second that I get into an early war, I'm probably going to stop recruiting anything other than Empoisoners in my capital. And that's just because a stack of 15 or 20 Empoisoners that somebody runs an army into is probably just going to be dead. It depends, of course. They can have bodyguards and stuff, but it's a major threat, especially in the early game or early mid game or mid game. Of course, there's things people can do to protect against it. So you don't want to put all your horses in the Empoisoner bag, but it's a really good bag to have, to have some tricks in. So yeah, so that's that. And then the Reborn, these guys are your recruit anywhere crappy mage. So they're sacred, so they make pretty good researchers, but you can see they're more expensive than the Tomb King, so they're not as good at researching as the Tomb King. But they can't be more useful, whereas the Tomb King is always Death Fire, which you can do like Banefire darts. This is not a very useful like level 1 path to have. Death 1, Fire 1, it's not great. You can do Banefire darts, which is okay, but you're holy. You're not only sacred, but you're holy. So you could bless your sacred units, which is one of the main reasons to get these guys, though you do have other priests. But these guys are not holy. But despite not being, so basically, despite having less paths, right? Like they're just missing a holy path. They're more expensive than the Keeper of the Tombs. However, sometimes they come in a Death 2 variety, which in my opinion, because they can do Horde of Skeletons and stuff, is a lot better than a Death Fire. So half of these are basically significantly better than the Keeper of the Tombs. But because they're sacred, they're going to have reasonably low upkeep. I don't know. You can make an argument that instead of getting Keeper of the Tombs to be your research monkeys, you get Reborn. They're a little more expensive, but half of them are pretty useful in combat as Horde of Skeletons casters. A long way to say that. The other thing that can be really important is that you have really good priests. Priests are powerful, indeed. Not only are they powerful, where you get a Lizard King, which is a slow to recruit Holy 3, recruit anywhere Holy 3. This is really rare. There's not a lot of nations with recruit anywhere Holy 3s. There's not many nations in the game that have Holy 3s as their only path in general. A lot of times it's tacked on to some other unit. And the thing is when you add on a bunch of other magic paths, if you want to use them basically just as a Holy 3 mage, because you want to preach, like to control Dominion, these guys in a temple can preach your Dominion all the way up to 7 candles. So if you want to just use them as a priest, anything else you add on, other paths, etc., is just basically making the chassis more expensive, but you're not getting particular value out of it. So there's not a lot of nations that have, just pure Holy 3 mages. This is one of them, like Bogarus is one of them, Atlantis is one of them. Some of the other Ctis have, I think all the Ctis have these guys. But anyway, it's a feature, it's a selling point for the nation. This will be particularly noteworthy with one of the strategies we're going to talk about. But yeah, this is really important for controlling Dominion, but you also have Holy 2s. These are going to be extremely important for our strategy. And these are interesting for 2 reasons. One is they're a Holy 2 priest, and that's the main reason we're interested in them, and I'll explain why. The second is that they have Temple Trainer, and Temple Trainer lets you get a Sacred Serpent in any province you have a temple. So you just assign one of these guys and you get a sacred unit a turn. Sacred Serpents aren't amazing, but they're not bad. I mean, they're kind of bad, but they have some good things going for them. They have a fair amount of hit points. They have a semi-damaging attack. And with the Bless we're going to take, they're going to be pretty good. Pretty okay. And then you have these guys who are really cheap, but they're Holy Ones. So if you just need somebody to help, bless an expansion party, these are an extremely cheap add-on. They're half the price of an Indie Priest. An Indie Priest is 60 gold. These guys are 30. They are ridiculously cheap to get. Okay. For troops, now we get to the real thing of why Ctis is typically considered a dumpster tier nation. Are these the most versatile, best mages in late age? No, not really. They're okay. They're passable. They're thematic. They're cool. Like Sarumancers are cool. They also have old age. But, aside from that, it's a fine roster of mages. Like, it's very playable in the late age. The troops, however, are garbage. They are garbage for the late age. Your sacred is the Tomb Guard. This is the one redeeming troop. It's a playable late age sacred. It's got 21 protection. It's got really good armor. It's got good stats. And it's sacred. It's fine. Right? You can, especially if you take like a hard skin bless, these guys have very high protection. So they're playable. But they're not great. They don't do a lot of damage. They're not very killy. They can kind of just exist on the battlefield and slowly chip away at things. They're not really... You wouldn't be careful how much you invest into this. Like, if you were to get just... I don't even know what you would get. Like, you could do a stat bless where you get, like, attack and defense. You get, like, 3 or 4 attack or defense and maybe some strength. and these guys become like pretty solid. And then you get this scale. You can probably still get pretty good scales where you can make a fair number of these guys because, they take a fair amount of resources, but not an extraordinary amount. Maybe you could be making 8 of these guys a turn with good stats. They would be nice. But then, like, okay, are you going to get the resistances on them? By the time you do the full stat resistance suite, they're not really a good enough sacred to justify that. Like, you could probably do one or the other, right? You could be like, okay, we're going to get some resistances on them, or we're going to get some stats. They're just not even though stat resistance stuff is normally pretty economical, they're just kind of not good enough for it, in my opinion. They're just a kind of meh sacred. They're not bad. You can use them for expansion, but they're not going to carry the game for you the way some other sacreds will. Okay, so that's the Tomb Guard. Aside from the Tomb Guard, this is a dumpster roster, right? These guys are a little better. The Desert Rangers, this is like a late age Ctis unique unit. You get pretty okay protection. But then we're back to like early age stuff. You get like the Falconeer, which is a fine unit in the early age. And the late age, he's kind of outclassed by pretty much every other infantry. You can still expand with these guys fine. They're okay. This is your best unit for expansion in late age as a scales unit. They get easily repelled. They don't have much protection compared to other player troops. They're going to probably have enough to kind of shrug off archer fire to a degree, but crossbows, which are now common in the late age, they don't have a shield. They're going to get torn to pieces by crossbows. And then they've got basically nothing. I mean, this is complete garbage. These guys you can also expand with. They have 16 protection, but it's just bad stats like 10 strength, 10 attack, 12 defense. They do have a shield, so if you're fighting a crossbow nation, this probably is what you're going to make. You just don't feel good about making this. Like it's not terribly expensive, but it just doesn't feel good. Like it's not a very exceptional unit in any way. These guys don't have a hat or kind of garbage. These guys, you basically would buy them just for the javelins, and the javelins and shields. Otherwise, there's not much going for them. So the problem is they're really compared to most other nations in the game and late age, they're really underclassed in the troop roster department. So when you're playing this nation and how you want to think about it, you have to think, how am I going to win my first war when I have garbage troops? And my mages, we can do some things well. We can do Banefire. We can do Horde of Skeletons. We can do maybe some thugging. But, can you win a war off the back of just that? Maybe you can. You do Darkness. You can do Rigor Mortis. You can do some other things. There's a fair number of things you can do. But, are you going to win your first war off the back of that? And I think it's a pretty tall order compared to other nations which have, major advantages. And my philosophy in Dominions 5 for playing this was that I don't think there's many combinations that you can reliably win a first war off the bank of everything you see here. And by win a first war, I don't mean just Vulture, right? If somebody attacks you committed all in, are you going to win that conflict? And I think you can do it, but not with this stuff here. I think you basically have to build a pretender to do it. So that was my conclusion in Dominions 5, is that the troops are so garbage and the mages are so garbage that you need basically a pretender. And I picked the Mother of Monsters as something that was going to carry me through the early and the mid game. And that if anybody wanted to attack me, I was going to magic phase on top of them with a Mother of Monsters that was just enormous, had huge investment, and she would just kill whatever was there. So that was basically my plan. And I think that probably is the best way to play Ctis in Dominions 5. And I'll tell you, now, why would you do that? Because you could pick any nation and just make a pretender and try to survive off the back of your pretender supported by some troops for the early and mid game. Why would you pick Ctis? And now we get to the real meat and potatoes of the national overview. And that is that there is something listed here that is what makes this, in my opinion, maybe one of the hardest scaling nations in the game. So that's right. So a nation which I think is probably D tier, and I don't think it's definitely not an S tier nation, right? But I think it has one of the strongest scaling mechanics in the game, and that is undead priests can reanimate the dead. And now, when you read this, what you're supposed to think is that, hey, we have some powerful spells here in enchantment, And you can summon these undead priests, and they cost death gems. And then they can reanimate dead for you for the rest of the game. And you're like, okay, that's great. That's really strong. We'll take a look at what those things actually are, but you're like, okay, that's pretty good. The thing is, though, is that it's not just... So the way reanimation mechanics work in Dominions is a priest can have a reanimator tag. If you have the reanimator tag, then you will reanimate stuff when you are doing reanimation. That is not what this is. This is not our undead priests have the reanimator tag. This is all undead priests can reanimate the dead. So, for example, there used to be a thing you would do in Dominions 4 where you would summon a Mound King and you would make it your prophet, because all nations had this trait. All nations had the ability that undead priests could reanimate dead. So pretty much any nation, you would get a Mound King, you would make him your prophet, so now it's an undead prophet, and he can now reanimate dead for you. This is a very common opening kind of part of any play, right, that people would want to do. Now that's been gotten rid of. Now you basically need to have the reanimator tag, but there's still a couple nations that have this left. Like Airmore can do it, like indie priests you can get for Airmore to do ghouls, things like that. I think Lemuria can do it too. Indie priests can do spirits. Ctis is another one, but Ctis gets maybe the best. This is why they're the strongest scaling. They get maybe the best things you can get via reanimation. You can get Tomb Chariots, which are really good, and you can get Sacred Serpents, or Tomb Worms, which are really good. And we're going to talk about those right now. Okay, so this is so of the spells you get, the lowest one, the Grave Consort, gives you a Holy 1. The 16 Death Gem one gives you a Holy 2, and the 23 Gem one gives you a Holy 3. And so here they all are. Here's the Holy 1. You get this guy. Here's the Holy 2, and here's the Holy 3. So we're going to talk about what they summon first, and we'll talk about how to use the Holy 3 in combat. So the Holy 1 gets to summon ghouls, soulless, and long dead, right? Ghouls take your population. They turn them into these guys who are not mindless. They can hold up fort walls. They're pretty useful. Soulless are trash, but you get a ton of them. They hit hard, but have very bad stats normally for like attack and defense. And the long dead are kind of your workaday undead. You can get soulless, you need corpses. So if you don't have corpses, you can't get them. Ghouls, you need population. Long dead, you can get no matter what. So anyway, we'll get some of the Ctisian long dead. Your Holy 2s, instead of getting the base list, now you can also get a Tomb Worm. This is your Sacred. The Holy 3s, instead of just getting a Tomb Worm, you could get 2 Tomb Worms, or you could get Tomb Chariots. I believe if you have Dominion score 7, this goes from 2 to 3. I don't know why that is. It's not explained, but that's a thing. And then importantly, if you have an Amulet of the Dead, this will work on some things, but not others. So we'll go ahead and make a couple Amulets of the Dead here for you. If I can find it. Boop, boop, boop. Okay, so we've made these. We'll go ahead and pull them up. So this is a Tomb Chariot. You can see we're in 10 Dominion. So we got this turn 3 Tomb Warriors, or Tomb Chariots. So the Tomb Chariots are very good. They trample. They're size 4. They're very killy. They have a falchion, which does a ton of damage with high attack, and a bite with high attack does a fair amount of damage as well. So they're very killy. However, they don't have many hit points. They have pretty good defense, but they're going to die pretty quickly. They're kind of, the way to think of these is they're like shock troops, right? They don't want to like wade in and like slowly mulch their way through things, because they're going to die pretty quick. They'll get banished. There's a bunch of bad things that'll happen to them. Dear God, don't let them see like fire elementals or something. Fire elementals will wreck these guys. So a bunch of things will kill them. But if you have a critical mass of them, they kind of tend to kill everything upon contact very quickly. And they're pretty fast. They're combat speed 16. So if you put them at the front in a big long line and you have them on attack rear, they're going to do so much damage in the first 5 rounds of combat that there's not going to be a ton of stuff left over. So like a strategy to think about with these guys is you have like a ton of Sarumancers lined up in the front. They're not buffing or anything. They're just doing Banefire, right? And these guys aren't doing hold and attack waiting to get buffed. They're charging. So maybe your opponent's got some strategy like, hey, we're going to buff up our guys before they run in. Meanwhile, they've got Tomb Chariots running at them turn 1 with really fast, or turn 0 with really fast combat speed, and Banefire's like blasting out. It's a lot of damage. The flip side of these guys is that, they die a lot. You tend to have really high attrition. On one hand, you need to bring a critical mass of these guys so that, you kill things fast enough so that the battle's over in a few rounds. On the other hand, if you bring too many, they're pretty vulnerable to like battlefield wipes of all sorts. So If you bring too many, they kind of get wiped. And these aren't like long dead where you don't care at all if they die. You only have a limited amount of these. I mean, you're never going to be like Scalaria with Tomb Chariots where you just don't care. So, it's a balance of trying to bring a critical mass so that you kill things, but not bringing so many that you cry when they get wiped by battlefield wipes. But they're a good unit. As you can see, when we put a Amulet of the Dead, this bumps up from 2+ to 4+. And in High Dominion, that's going to be 5 a turn. So for an Amulet of the Dead, these guys are 23 gems to get, and then an Amulet of the Dead with the hammer is 3 gems. So it's 26 gems. You can get 5 Tomb Chariots a turn. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. If we put Tomb Worms, we're going to look at now. So Tomb Worms go on this guy. You can also get Tomb Worms with this guy, but you'll see the number didn't go up when we put the Amulet of the Dead on him. It still is 2. So this guy gets 1 per turn. If we put an Amulet of the Dead on him, he doesn't benefit and get 2 per turn. So the Tomb Worm, this is, in my opinion, what really, I mean, the Tomb Chariot's really good. You can totally do a Tomb Chariot focused build. You don't need a blast to make Tomb Worms good if you want to make Tomb Chariots. So let's talk about the Tomb Worm. There's a few things about it that are amazing. One is it has phenomenal hit points. 39 hit points is huge. It's 2 per square with size 3, which is really nice. Protection is reasonably high, but not super high. So base protection 10 is fine. It means it's not going to get like shredded by, casual arrows. It has phenomenal magic resistance, right? 16 magic resistance. So very, very good. This is like the best in the game for troops. You don't really have many, like the most top end summons usually have 16 magic resistance for troops. This is like as high as Illwinter will go for base troops magic resistance. I'm sure you can find some that are like 17 or 18, but this, as far as I can tell, is as high as it goes without having really done any research. Their morale is perfect, 30. Their strength, very high. This is a reasonably high damage slashing attack. 18 damage is pretty good. The attack skill is great. 15 attack skill is so good. However, defense is freaking garbage. It's basic. It might as well be 0. 5 is so low, it might as well be 0. So they're literally going to get hit every time they get swung at. And they don't have enough protection to really ignore it. So they're going to be there's going to be a lot of incoming damage. And their combat speed is low. So they're kind of slowly, slinking across the battlefield. Map move, though, is okay at 14. They're undead. So they have cold resistance, poison resistance, and they are inanimate. This means they're going to be, like, not healing. Oh, wait, no, they don't have the do not heals. Yeah. So anyway, this is just going to render them immune to certain kinds of spells, like Soul Drain, Soul Vortex and stuff. I think Soul Vortex, I think they're immune to that, which is interesting. I don't think I fully understood that when I played them. And then, Need Not Eat, Spirit Sight. Spirit Sight is a very nice little add-on there, too. But, they're undead, so they see in the dark anyway. But, and they're also 0 encumbrance. What about this unit? They're sacred. They have a lot of hit points. They have very modest protection, amazing magic resistance, and amazing morale, and amazing attack. Okay, and then pretty good strength. And then defense is horrible. So this, I think, is the key to making this whole nation really good. Because, I was mentioning you can spend your death gems to get these guys. But there's another way, which we're going to talk about, which kind of really makes this nation really strong. So we've got the Amulet of the Dead here. And that gives you little Ctisian dudes. And they're kind of good. They can get a trident. So this is a very high damage long dead. So the Ctis long dead are not something to scoff at. They don't have a lot of protection a lot of times. They die in droves, as long dead does. But they have very killy varieties. Like anytime you get these elite warrior looking guys, the hunched over lizards, they have the trident that does just a ton of damage. With reasonably high attack too, 12 attack skill. So, very good. The other guys, the standing upright lizard long dead, they're much more like standard chaffy human long dead that aren't very special, but they tend to have shields and stuff that make them a little better armored. So they're better for a different job. Like maybe you have a screen of these guys in front for the archers, and then these guys in a sparse line behind them where they come in with the tridents. Anyway, a lot of times you won't bother splitting them all out, but it's just important having some very killy units mixed in. So I would say the long dead is about average, but better than average because of these guys. But I don't think it's like in general as good as like Airmorian Long Dead or something, or Giant Long Dead. Okay, so that's these. Now, how do we break the game? Well, like how do we really scale this? The answer is because it's not just that these guys are reanimator priests, even though they do get a reanimation bonus, which is great, and they are reanimator priests. The magical thing is that if we take any guy, any Long Dead, like we make a king, this is what I was telling you about, and we make him our prophet, then this guy is now also a reanimator priest, right? So he can summon these things. I'm like, okay, well, how does that help us? We can only have one prophet. We can only, prophetize one of our tomb kings. How does this help? Well, there is a way to mass produce a Long Dead, or undead mages or undead priests, and that is with a very handy spell called Life After Death. In this one, anybody that dies in combat will be permanently reanimated as a soulless mage who is undead. And because of that, we can mass produce any of our priests, which we get all 3 flavors of. We can kill them all in combat with Life After Death. And then those which survive will exist to reanimate Long Dead for us. And you can pick your flavor, and I think you should do a mix. It's probably nice to have a chariot threat. It's probably nice to have tomb worms, especially if you have a bless. Even without a bless, tomb worms are going to be excellent evocation bait. And then the Long Dead are great siege chaff. I think in terms of like siege strength per gold, priest level spent or whatever, the Long Dead are going to be, some of your best bets. In combat, these guys are amazing, these Tomb Kings. So the cheap ones, these guys are 35 hit points, but the Tomb Kings are 50 hit points. I mean, this is like high-end thug tier, like nearing super combatant levels of hit points. And they've got pretty good stats. Very good magic resistance, 18. And then, when I was making the comment earlier about 16 being very high for troops, mages tend to have higher, and commanders tend to have higher magic resistance. So, but yeah, I mean, these guys have amazing stats. You can super combat them or try to thug them, especially if you have other people to buff them with spells. And they get access to very important Ctisian spells. These are basically the standard spells that most of the undead factions get. They've got this one, which is battlefield-wide thing that gives you, I think, 4 extra attack and like 50% more speed or something like that. So this is an amazing buff. You have to be Holy 4 to cast it, which is tricky, right? You can do it through communions with Sarumancers. These are Holy 1, but if you have a communion of 8, you can get there. So that's a way to do it. I don't think you can make priests that don't have a mage path. I don't think you can put like a master matrix on them. I know you can't have priest slaves. I don't remember if these guys can be communion masters. If so, it'd be pretty easy to put them on top of a 2-slave communion and cast it. That would be something worth testing out. But yeah, this is a really powerful spell. It's really, really good. And then Royal Protection, this is basically an MR negates anti-magic. You probably just want to cast anti-magic anyway. But, you have really high MR on some of your stuff anyway, so you can just, if you don't have the ability to cast anti-magic, you can just spam this. However, having high base MR on your stuff like Tomb Worms, it's going to be harder for this spell to affect them. So it's probably just better to cast anti-magic. And then this is an area of effect version of the improved attack and speed spell. So, and yeah, these are just lower versions of it. And then, of course, these guys can do Divine Blessing. So here is what I think, zooming out for Dominions 5 Ctis, is that one of the paths to play them, the way I'm going to play them, is that you can't really trust surviving in the early and middle game on your national roster. So you make a god that's so badass, that has so horrible of scales, that you're going to be able to survive on her back. And meanwhile, you get to the point where you can do Life After Death kind of rituals where you're bringing back your living priests as undead mages or priests. And you're using that to scale your free spawn. And that scales very, very hard. You're also turning death gems, like you're still getting Tomb Kings and stuff. Now, when you're doing the priest reanimation, the priest you want to get back is these guys, if you're making Tomb Worms. If you want to make chariots, you have to do Holy 3s. You don't have a choice. But these guys for 230 gold and 4 recruitment points will get you 2 Tomb Worms, or these guys for 80 gold and 2 recruitment points will get you 1. So these are obviously a better deal for making Tomb Worms. So these are the main people you're summoning to get Tomb Worms back, or you're recruiting and then you're converting them. So the idea is that basically you can probably, with this build, have the best scaling sacred production in the game, I think. Blood Nations can give you like a run for your money, but high-level undead can be harder to deal with, especially with high magic resistance, than demons. Because demons, you can put up demonic cleansing in the late game and kind of roast them. Undead, there's not necessarily the equivalent. So now we're going to switch over for the last part of this video, and we're going to pull up Dominion 6, and we're going to take a look at the changes to Ctis in Dominion 6. Okay, so here is Ctis in Dominion 6, and you can see there's new units down here. So we're going to talk about them. The first thing we're going to talk about is a change to the commander roster. And this is the most important change, in my opinion, to Ctis and Dominion 6. And that is the Keeper of the Tombs, the Cap guy, is now Holy 2, which is amazing. It's just kind of nice. It's a nice little buff to add on the end. And he's more expensive as well. But he's just scaled up about the same. I don't think he's significantly more expensive compared to other things. Like, this guy used to be 125. He's 175. He's 50 gold more expensive. This guy's 55 gold more expensive. But he picked up Reanimator Priest. So this guy can now make a Tomb Worm for you every turn. And you start off with the Citadel, so you get 1.5 of these guys a turn. It's a pretty big deal. You get a lot of Tomb Worm production. They can also make Long Dead if that's your, if that's your undead of choice. And depending what you're fighting, and depending whether you have a Bless or not, will determine which of those is probably the better summon. If you don't have a Bless, right, just make Long Dead. You get pretty good Long Dead. If you have a Bless, you probably want to make Tomb Worms. So yeah, this is the first change. And this is the thing is that like in the game I'm going to show you, I think we end up getting the life after death. We still have Tomb Worms before them. We're spending our death. We're outside searching for death. We're spending our death gems on Tomb Kings to get Tomb Worms, who are, by the way, the Tomb Kings at 23 death gems are, let me pull it up. So the Tomb Kings, you get 2 Tomb Worms per 23 death gems versus 1 Tomb Worm per 16 death gems if you get the Tomb Priest. So while I was saying the recruitable unit you want to convert via life after death into an undead priest is the Holy 2 guy. If you're summoning him with death gems, the guy you want to get Tomb Worms is the Holy 3 guy, so the Tomb King. So you're still going to be casting this, and you're going to have a decent amount of Tomb Worm production without life after death. But when it really kicks into gear is once you get life after death going, and that's probably, depending on how you do it, whether you do it with an artifact or just with the spell, you have to, there's a whole criteria to get it going. We'll talk about that in the next video on Pretender design, because that's going to factor into the Pretender design. But yeah, you're still going to have a fair amount of production with the Tomb King, but it's not really going to kick into gear until you get the life after death thing going. And that's probably going to be between turn 30 and 50, depending on how well you can time it. And maybe you could get it like as early as turn 25 or something. But I think I got it on like turn 34 or something in my game. But basically, because of that, you have like really slow scaling until that point. Like you're kind of vulnerable. You're really surviving off the back of your god. In Dominion 6, because this guy's a Reanimator Priest, if you're only making this guy out of your capital the first year, now in practice you won't, because you're probably going to need some guys to lead troops and things like that and whatnot. But maybe there's a way to manage it. Like maybe you do Falconeer expansion with indie commanders or something. But if you can manage that, you're going to get, by the end of the first year, you'll have 12 times 1.5. So you'll be at about 18 potentially Tomb Worms a turn. That's a lot of Tomb Worms a turn. You'll be having the most sacred production already at the end of the year 1 compared to other nations. Now, other nations may have better sacreds, but anyway, it's a cool thing. So basically, you can start scaling a lot sooner in your sacred undead shenanigans. We'll talk real quick about the overview here. So in Dominion 6, natural scales go up to 2. So it's harder to dump scales, like to fully dump all your scales and have more points for a bless, because you can't take everything to 3. And that's one of the things when you're picking a pretenders which have a scales malice, like Turmoil, you might be like, oh, that's bad. But it also lets you dump more points into Turmoil. So you can they can help facilitate a bigger bless. So for us, we have a heat malice. It's going to shift our skills towards heat, and we have a death malice. So when you're building a pretender, you can see we still start off like this, but we get more points if we go to death 3. So it didn't give us a death scale. It did give us a heat scale, but for the non-temperature ones, it doesn't give you the scale. You have the ability to take it. So it helps us, dump points for deeper helpless if we want to do that. The troops have also changed. So a lot of these are the same, like the Falconeer. He's actually a little different. No, he gets plate armor now. So it's an upgraded version of the Falconeer, 17 protection instead of 15. Some of them, this is, I think, the same. I think this is the same heavy infantry. And I think this guy's the same at 16. I think these guys are pretty much the same. They might have changed slightly. But, cold-blooded is also not as bad as it used to be. And let's see if they upgraded the tooltip. Cold-blooded creatures get exhausted very quickly when fighting in cold provinces. +2 encumbrance per cold scale. Now, you can potentially have 5 cold scales, especially with things like Wolf and Winter. So in cold 5, this can still be pretty extreme. Like 10 extra encumbrance is huge. But cold resistance reduces this penalty. Cold resistance of 5 gives you a 50% reduction, and cold resistance of 10 gives you a 100% reduction. So if you take like a 10 cold resistance bless or something, or you take a 5 cold resistance bless, so most of your troops have a 50% reduction, your mages can cast, protection from cold, get the extra 5 cold red, and that'll put them up at 100% reduction in conjunction with a bless. So it's still very important. Like if you're fighting and you don't have any cold resistance or anything, and you're fighting in cold 3, 6 encumbrance a turn in addition to whatever you already have. So it would take this guy up to 13. You're getting stat penalties pretty quickly as your encumbrance goes up. So very quickly you're getting stat penalties, which means it's going to be harder for you to actually kill things and close out the battle quickly. And then because you can't close out the battle quickly, after 7 rounds in combat, your guys are taking naps. So it's still very impactful fighting in high cold, especially like cold 5. But yeah, it's now something you can deal with and you can mitigate. So I think that's great. So all the units got that, but we also got access to just a generic cheap crossbowman. So that's huge. So you can now be a crossbow faction, which is awesome. Very low resources and pretty low recruitment points. Not great morale or anything, but, pretty good. And they can walk over rivers, which is more mobile than a normal crossbowman. So this is a very solid addition to the nation. In late age, you can also recruit crossbows anywhere, but it's nice to be able to really slam them in any fort you want to. Like I said, the Falconeer's better with better protection armor. You also get access to this halberdier. And this is one of the important things, is that one of the reasons the Falconeer isn't as good in the late age is that other things have more protection, and slashing damage really relies on it doing a fair amount of damage after armor. You want to have a high damage slashing attack, and the slashing will increase the amount of damage you do after the protection is subtracted out. So if you're fighting stuff with 20 protection now and you're doing 18 damage, it just really isn't that much damage coming out of the Falconeer. Compared to if you were fighting in middle age, maybe you're fighting things with 15 protection. You're doing a ton more damage, easily twice as much. So in late age, you start to run into scenarios where this Falchion really just isn't getting through the armor. Introduce the halberdier. So this guy has the punching power if you're fighting really high protection troops to punch through that. So having a guy with a big 2-handed weapon can be a really big deal in the late age. So this is a major kind of addition for them. Now, Ctis still isn't best in class for protection. 17 protection is nice, but it's not amazing. But they can now hold their weight, I think. And so if you're fighting things with low protection, you're going to be wanting to use the Falconeer. It's more complicated than that because this also is longer, so you don't have to worry about repel. But, you're fighting things with low protection where you don't need to worry about repel, you do the Falconeer. You're fighting things with high protection with longer weapons, maybe use the halberdier. So these are Scales Troops editions. We also have Sacred Troop edition, or a Sacred Troop edition. We get the Tomb Flame Wielder. And this guy is basically a Sacred that has a Banefire crossbow. This is not an area of effect attack. This only is going to affect who gets hit. That was one of my first questions, because I think skeletal archers may have a Banefire area of effect. I'm not 100% sure. I thought that was how it worked. But anyway, this only is going to affect the guy that gets shot, not the whole tile. But you're certainly not going to want to send thugs or super combatants into a squad that even has 15 of these guys in it, because you're pretty reliably going to get decayed. And then if you're going with the strat of, like, imagine you're a scales nation, right? And you're slamming crossbows. Would it be worth ever getting these guys? If you're slamming normal crossbows, would it be worth paying 2.5 times the amount to get the Banefire crossbows mixed in? Maybe. I think it depends, like, how thick the things you're hitting are. Like, getting decay on something, like, a lot of things get hit by a crossbow bolt, they're 1 foot out the door already being dead. So this will give, if it's lower MR stuff that has higher than average hit points, like maybe it's like 15 or 16 hit points with like low MR, these could be a good addition. In general, though, I think these probably aren't very good. I think it's a really interesting addition. I just don't think it's going to get used that much. But it's also a magic weapon, too. So potentially you don't have another source of magic weapon. You're getting raided by elves, which are doing like mist form and stuff. You need a way to pop mist form. Maybe it's just like 4 Banefire crossbows in a province, sitting there plinking them with magic armor-piercing bolts. Maybe that works. Maybe that's what it needs to get it. It is very slow shooting, 1 every 3 rounds. And then the Desert Ranger, this guy's mostly unchanged. Yeah, it's kind of funny because he actually has worse... The reason you would kind of get him is because he had okay armor before. Yeah, I think it's worse armor than some of the other guys. I don't think this guy changed. I think these are the same stats, but this guy's still... plenty respectable. If you're going with the bless build, you probably are going to want to take these guys. Yeah, and the other thing is, if you go death, all your guys have a lot of your guys have wasteland survival. Like, these guys have wasteland survival. These guys have wasteland survival. Do these guys? Yeah, these guys have wasteland survival. I don't know if all of these guys don't, but the Sarumancers do, and these are your main mage. This death limit's only going to get you to +1, but you could go for a play where you put up like Second Sun now, take death scales all the way up, tap everybody out on death scales. That'll start turning the whole world into wasteland, and then you'll have guys who can survive in the wasteland, which is kind of cool, and move on the wasteland well enough. So anyway, that's a kind of cool idea with the terraforming. So it doesn't seem like a ton of changes, but it's enough changes. The main weakness of Late Age Ctis and Dominions 5 is that the troop roster is so garbage that you can't really reliably survive in the first year except on the back of your god, in my opinion, in a competitive game. And the other problem is they scale. The reason I don't think Late Age Ctis and Dominions 5 is actually a D tier anymore, based on kind of what I shared about having the highest scaling sacred production and things like that, and their sacreds actually being pretty good. But I don't think they're S tier or anything close to that in Dominions 5. And the reason is they scale so slowly that if they scale well in the long run, there's a reasonable reason to think, okay, well, they don't scale until later. We should probably kill them sooner. And they don't really have the early game strength. Like, I could hold off probably a 1v2, but I probably wouldn't hold off a 1v3 coalition very long. I mean, I would probably make sure those people lost, or I'd try to, but I don't think anyway, it'd be tough. So because it's not a super strong nation in the early game, and it's a very strong nation in the deep late game, especially once this video comes out and people understand that Late Age Ctis actually isn't a complete dumpster fire, like, I and many other people had been saying, people will be incentivized to just kill them. And so then if you can't really survive to get to the part of your power curve where you're actually good, then it's actually not that great of a nation. So I would probably say it's like, instead of a D tier, it's probably like a C tier, but with the potential to be like, if you survive to the late game in really good form, like maybe you're an S tier. But that's not, you can't just assume you make it to the late game in good form. You have to like ride your power curve. So if you have a weak early part of your power curve, you're not very good. Now in Dominion 6, that has changed. We can produce a lot of sacreds at the beginning of the game. You have good enough troops now, like these guys are fine enough, and these guys are fine enough, and these guys are fine enough, that between these 3 troops, and then potentially a little support from your sacreds, you can reliably, I think, try to win a first war on your troops and mages like a normal nation and not need your god. And I think that opens up the builds. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next video, is all the potential builds for Ctis that I considered in 5, and then we'll talk about how that will change going into 6, because the bless system is reworked, there's less bless points, you can dump scales less, what that might mean. And also the requirements for the build have changed a lot because you don't need to do this. Like, you don't need to be all in on your bless or all in on your god. You could rely more on your troops. So anyway, we'll talk about that in the next video. And I haven't recorded any of the series and the game's over, but I've got all the turns saved. I may or may not go back and record the actual Dominions 5 game. Maybe I'll do like a highlight reel or something, because you guys probably want to watch Dominion 6 content too. So we'll see you guys next time. Take care.